And if you're dumb enough to get yourself stranded on the train tracks, you don't. Deserved ways anytime. Let those who evolve live. Yikes. Okay, that's very interesting, though. The evolution equals morality debate, or the evolution equals ethics debate. Is ethics an illusion of our biology? That is to say that our brains are doing the ethical reasoning, and that there's nothing greater than the ideas associated with our brains, because those things are just fake. They're fictions. They're like telling stories. And so everything that we have in our sort of ethical realm, when we are discussing what's right and wrong, we all tend to think that that means that there's something really right and really wrong, except if it's all just based on the brain and then based on our evolution. You could make the argument that that which is most adapted to survive is therefore right. And so you can make interesting justifications. I know it's a joke, but I don't know if it's fully a joke, because there are positions like that. Hey, if the child's dumb enough to get stuck on the train tracks, it's right that he should be removed from the gene pool, right? So rightness is connected to adaptability. Sorry to ruin that joke there, but I think it's a good jumping off place to start thinking about what ethical reasoning actually is, especially when it overlaps with science. If the dog was mine, I would feel more inclined to save it if it was older, because I would have a better bond with it, even if it was older. Yeah, how about if it was about to die, though? Like if it was really, really old? And I guess it would matter, though, still, if it was you were owning it, so there's still that proximity ethics. I still would not save the child because I am not emotionally attached to it. Okay. The child is it. Literally nothing would change. Even if it was a puppy, I would still go with the child. All right. No, it wouldn't change my mind. The dog is still a stud. I don't know that kid, so screw the kid. I'll save my dog. Honestly, no matter what I pick, whether dog, old or young, or child, delinquent or saviors of mankind, I will be seen in a negative. It'll still be negative in one way, but I would save the child for me. So I like a couple of those qualifiers there. The one thing is sort of the pragmatic truth of the fact that even if you are saving something actively, you're still going to be seeing a negative in it. Or that is to say, the dilemma causes grief no matter what. So it's going to always make you feel like you're not doing enough, which is sort of like an existential plight in and of itself. Sort of, if you were just to take this dilemma and then bring it out into entirety of life, think of yourself right now. You probably don't have these existential crises as teenagers because you're distracted by your own sort of myopic life. What if you just stop and think, God, how much is my cell phone? You know, and how much would that money have gone to save how many children in some other place that would need that money? Have you ever stopped to think about how much you take and assume and use for your own life? But does that not make you feel like, God, I'm like a horrible person because I'm not saving the kid. I'm out of the train. You're not doing it. You're actively seeking something else. And so this is where the idea of limiting resources or limited resources in finite being causes tension when we do ethical reasoning. Because ultimately, you can't do everything. You're not able to. It's impossible to save everyone. And so these dilemmas, these smaller dilemmas help us hopefully cope with those bigger ones that happen where it's like, I'm not able to do these things. So how do I adjust my ethical reasoning so I'm not living my life completely unsatisfied and unhappy because I'm not doing the right things? Also, they said, I would save the child for me. What do you think that qualifier for me sort of represents from our discussions last week regarding objective and subjective? What kind of statement would that be? I would save the child for me. Like for me, I would save the child. What is that assuming regarding that idea of objective versus subjective? Well, be specific then. So we did talk about morals versus ethics as well, which kind of has an overlap. So to them, it would hurt their conscience. But what is that sort of implying or qualifying with regarding the idea of objective versus subjective?
I like ice cream.
It's sort of like I like ice cream. So saying that I would save the child, they're saying that's a subjective truth. Like I want this, but I'm not necessarily binding anyone else to this idea. It's okay if Jared thinks something different. That he thinks that it's okay to save the dog. I think it's okay to save the child. We just have different views. Some of us would think that the child is an objective truth. I think it's objectively true to save the child, and I think Luis should also save the child, even if he disagrees with me. I just think he's wrong. We can say that he's wrong, and we can still get along, but I think he's wrong in this idea. So that would be an example of an objective qualifier, right? It would make me want to save the dog even more because of how helpless it would be at those 2 ages. Okay, so the dog is just so super helpless, whereas the kid's like, oh my God, no, no, no! But apparently he's, it's his fault. I don't know. That's interesting. I would save the child if the dog was old. Okay. Yeah, I think the dog was older. I'd be more likely to sacrifice it. Okay. I didn't know we were doing a little religion here. Sacrifice? No, I know what you mean. If the dog was frail and dying, I would choose the kid. I don't really care how old the dog is. It's my dog, bro. Osama always worth more than some kid.
Is the kid like paralyzed?
Was the kid like paralyzed? No, he's not paralyzed. He's just stuck.
If it makes you feel better.
Would that matter to you? You're like, is the kid's paralyzed? I mean, come on.
There was something wrong with him, yeah.
When a train hits something in the road, it's like a car hitting an aluminum can.
Okay. I don't get why that's a creepy way.
It's an instantaneous
Oh, I see. It was a puppy, the kid would start screaming, "It's so fluffy!" and let me save the dog. It was an older dog, then no kid for sure. What? I would say no, however, if it was young, I'd have no sympathy towards it, and that hasn't experienced much life has to offer. If it was young like the dog, okay, I don't know. I would say no. However, if it was young, I would have more sympathy towards it. I'm assuming it's the dog. That this dog hasn't had much experience. Like, you guys are weird, dude. Or to be totally honest, I'm kind of with Kinsey on this point. Like, what's wrong with all with your dog? But my ethical reasoning, I'm pretty clear about, and you can disagree with me. I'm a speciesist, so I would say that the idea that my species is what I'm interested in saving. Troy, I think, is agreeing with me there. That my species is more important than another species. Just by inherent traits that I have in common with it.
So if you had a dog.
So if there is an evolutionary back. It's not just that I'm thinking that children are always more important in every circumstance. I'm just saying that I value my own sort of genes in that sense, and so I always choose.
What if you had a dog?
The dog.
You save from the pound. You're taking care of it, and you raise it to become like a middle-aged dog.
Yeah, see, but it's always relegated to the speciesist.
What if
The dog is for not necessarily for the dog's happiness. Domestication of animals wasn't for like the animal's benefit; it was for humans' benefit. So that's what I would say as I reason through this. Domestication actually is a horrible thing for dogs when we don't do it right. So like dog pounds, like saying you take it from the dog pound. Why are there dog pounds? That is the result of neglect of our domestication, our responsibility to the species underneath us. And so at that point, you have all these animals that are suffering all the time. I just happen to be benevolent and take one animal home and make me feel better. And then give that dog a nice life for the time being. I'm not saying that dogs aren't important. I'm just saying that between that and a child, I would.
What if it wasn't a child? What if it was like an old, like really old, like homeless man who had nothing to give to our government or anything?
I would say the speciesist in me would still say the old homeless man is still more important than a young dog. Well, because I know what she's trying to reason out the idea of utility, which is like the old homeless man has less utility than my special dog. So that would be a conflict. And I would say, I'm not going to say that I wouldn't have a conflict with that. I don't want to like touch a smelly old man, but I would love to grab my dog. That's an issue. But then the speciesist in me that tells me I have to value the dignity of the human life next to me. If I'm going to be consistent, I would have to take the homeless man. So you're right, though. There'd be an emotional overlap or conflict. All right. So very good. And just keep thinking about those things. You can ask your friends, neighbors, a little party trick for you. Next time things are dull, just ask them if they would save a child or a dog, and you get some good responses. Right now, what I like to see you guys do before we talk about practical. I guess we can say that right now. I'll do this now, and then I want to get to your argue it out. So have those ready. Just go ahead and do that right now. Take about 10 seconds. Get your argue it outs all ready. Get your charter plane survivor thing ready, because that's going to be the rest of the period as you guys discussing those things in your team. Yeah. Uh-oh. Can you download it or something?
My list is in here. I don't know where it's.
I didn't know how to do that. What's it called? I don't know what the warrant was. The warrant.
So, well, the SVP doesn't have this one.
We put it out so it's different than we mostly like it's
All right.
Mr. Morris.
Okay, good question. So, real quick, warrant is like a presupposition. So it's sort of like what are you allowing for in as being true, even though you're not proving it in your argument. So you're sort of, the warrants are like, here are the things that have to be true in order for my argument to exist. I'm assuming these things. It was sort of when I said the warrants, like for ethical reasoning, I'm warranting that man is a rational being, that he's capable of making his own decisions, and that does impact how we view ethical reasoning. For instance, we talked about the justice system. If we can prove that someone is not capable of making rational decisions, we can get rid of culpability because their ethical reasoning doesn't matter or it doesn't actually exist. Anything that people do or don't do, if it's just based on either their sort of genetic predisposition to do something, or if it's based on some type of mental illness, then yeah, there's nothing that. So warrants are basically things that you have to assume to be true before you can go on with your argument. So think about it, it's like the building blocks that you're just doing, that you're just building on, but you're not actually talking about. Everything else in your argument, though, has to be cited with evidence. But you're not necessarily citing everything with evidence. You have to presuppose certain things, like the rationality of language or intelligence, that kind of thing. So just think about, what is it that I'm building on? What am I standing on when I have an argument? What is underneath me? Because I have all these evidences, but really, what am I standing on? That's really TOK. If you can do that, you'll be fine. You'll be perfect. So real quick, before we start with your guys' discussions, practical versus theoretical ethics, this division here is important for a couple of reasons. And it goes straight to some of our scenarios and tons of others. I mean, you can find some great philosophy experiments online. In fact, if you go to a website called Philosophy Experiments, or just Google that, there's all sorts of really good scenarios that help you reason out things in a very isolated way that will help you sort of determine what you actually believe is right and wrong in the real world. So they have, for instance, give you an example. Let's say that you had you're in a room like this, and there's a window to the outside of the room that opens and closes. There's no screen on it. Okay, so it's just, it opens. And of course, when you open, especially around the summer or springtime, you get a lot of what coming in? You get like bugs, or you get like just like pollen and things. So it becomes like dusty, right? So you open the window because you like fresh air, right? So you open the window, but you know that when opening your window, there's going to be some like pollen that kind of comes in. Well, there's in this world, in this scenario, there's a special kind of seed pollen that comes in when you open windows, and these seed pollen will eventually get on your carpet, and it loves your carpet. It thinks that your carpet is the best place for it to grow, and so it just so happens that the seed pollen that you necessarily, even though you open the window, you didn't necessarily want seed pollen to come in. You just know that that's going to happen. You let it in, you open the window because you like fresh air, and then that seed pollen comes in, and it's landed on the ground now. And the seed pollen, over the course of time, will actually start growing. It'll start growing into like a cabbage patch-looking thing, a little cabbage piece. But eventually it's going to open up, and there's going to be a baby inside.
Oh, like a baby?
So there's a baby inside.
Yeah.
Now that seed is just a little tiny thing. It's not a baby yet. It doesn't look like a baby, but it's going to become a baby at some point. It's got all the genetic makeup of a baby, and it's on your carpet. Do you when you open the window, Do you vacuum the carpet after that because you just like the fresh air and you just want to, even though you know that the seed babies are going to, or the seeds are going to become seed babies or full on babies. Yeah. Well, what kind of question is that?
That's
Why
an
would I even
abortion
ask that?
question.
What is it?
That's an abortion question.
Well, it's not an abortion question, but I think it's connected. That's obviously what you're trying to do. So you're paralleling as an idea that kind of takes it out of its context for a second so you can do ethical reasoning without all the trappings of politic or trappings of emotion that goes into this situation. Like you're not going to say, well, my aunt vacuumed up seed babies, and so I feel horrible about that idea. She's crying all the time because of it, and that makes me not want to vacuum up seed babies. Because it separates the two out a little bit, right? Or sort of my political party thinks that's vacuum up seed babies is wrong, so I'm going to think it's wrong. It helps us sort of say, well, if in that scenario it's wrong to vacuum up the seed babies, maybe I need to put a filter always on my window, and whenever I open my window, no matter what, even though I just want fresh air, I need to know that I'm responsible for whatever comes into that window and grows on my carpet all the time. And so I should not, because I'd be killing babies or potential babies if I were to vacuum it up, right? So that would be the argument. You see how that kind of puts it into a different perspective? And this is important for a couple of reasons, because as we go back to this slide here on practical versus theoretical ethics, I think what we see is that ethics isn't reasoned in a bubble. They all have impact into the world. And so when we have these interesting philosophical debates about, well, if we were to apply a consequentialist ethic, what would that look like? Versus a deontological ethic. So go back to the dog train incident. Consequentialist would look at the utility of the two and argue it from a utility standpoint. A deontology would look at the action itself and say, is this action rational? And do I have a duty to save one versus the other over against? Just for the sake of the action itself, to save the child is better than saving the dog, or vice versa. To put them into these big walled categories is very difficult to do in the real world, in part because what we'll end up doing is some type of weird, strange synthesis of various theories. Whether we know them or not, we kind of work on intuitive ethical reasoning all the time that sort of blends the two. So it's good to separate them out in a environment like this where we can start thinking about it and reasoning, okay, well, why is that wrong? Or if I were to tweak the scenario, constantly, can I still maintain the consistency, or can I change lenses and look at it now from a different part of the kaleidoscope, right? Different part of the theory. But when we do practical ethics, it involves application of this reasoning within a complex system. The system is constantly changing, and so the question is, can I be perfectly ethically consistent in all that I do, or am I always going to find myself at odds with what I actually believe is right and wrong in the world? Will I always do the right, or will there be things that will constantly like, oh, I didn't do that right, but I still think it's right because I'm doing it, and I don't know, I'm just going to do it because I know it's inconsistent with what I thought was right, but I'm going to do it because now I've sort of switched gears a little bit. I think it's now more right to not lie in this situation, or to lie in this situation in order to save somebody. We had a scenario I had a philosophy of education course in which the scenario was that a father comes in, he looks like he's heavily been drinking, and you've already sort of seen like bruise marks on a child in your class, like you teach second grade. And the father comes in, and he's visibly upset with you, and visibly upset with the child for his grades. And so you have this intuition that the father is beating the child. Do you have an obligation to tell the father at that moment whether the son is doing well or not in the class? Do you lie to him in order to kind of ameliorate the moment so that you can get away and the child can be safe for at least a time to where you can call CPS? Or do you tell the father straight up all the things that you have on your mind regarding his parenting and potentially risk causing danger or harm to the child? What do you do in that situation? Do you lie to the father to make sure the son is not hurt for that time, or do you tell him the truth? Because that's your job as a teacher, to be honest with parents. What do?
Lie to the father, call Child Protective Services.
Lie to the father? Do you agree with it?
I feel like you don't have an obligation to do anything, but the morally right thing to do is to lie. Of course, you're not supposed to lie.
Yeah.
But in certain circumstances, it's the right thing.
So you're saying that it's not just that it's it's technically wrong, but I can still do it. You're saying it's in fact the right thing to do because you're saving the child. That'd be very much a consequentialist ethical reasoning. Very good. Yes.
You're going to have to approach the father, please call CPS.
So you wouldn't even talk to the father. You say, I'm not going to talk to you right now. Now, assuming that might very well work, but let's assume then you had to choose between the two. If you were to not talk to him, he's going to assume that you know something, and he's going to go home and hurt his son. So you have to choose either to talk to lie to him, say your son is great, yada yada. He's doing well in the class. Don't worry about it. You look great, by the way. Like, what do you say? Do you lie to him, or do you tell him the truth in this situation when he's asking for it? Would you you would lie still? Okay, good. Who else? Good. I don't mean that in like you all have to believe that. Anyone actually tell the truth to the father? No. Why would that be?
It was similar to how my childhood was. Like, he didn't beat me, but it was just like,
okay.
I would have physical punishment, not for grades, but like if I did something bad,
yeah.
I would get like a wooden spoon in my hands.
Sure.
What if he's
I'm just saying like
hold on.
Is it like
let Jared finish.
Is it like a bruising beating, or is it just like
I think it would be enough. I guess the scenario would be something like it. That's a good question. Like when you have all that kind of in between gradient. So I don't want to immediately diminish it. You saw a bruise, and that you don't know for sure that it's going to be worse this next time, but you have like at least an intuition that after meeting the father, he's getting visibly angry. He's worried that his son is not doing well in class, and so and you smell alcohol on. So you have these indicators of instability. So that's sort of how I would leave it in that situation. And would you say that your job as a teacher is less is a little bit more disinterested in sort of private family life, and you're maybe suggesting that you're just going to say, well, here's his grade and here's what he can do to improve, and would you leave it at that, or would you feel like you needed to kind of lie to the father?
I think the job of the teacher is actually like talk to the father, see what's going on first.
Okay. So you would say, we need to talk about maybe behavior going on in class, or not in class but at home and that sort of thing. Okay. Kind of, you'd be definitely on fragile ice when it comes to that. If you're feeling a little bit of danger from the father, but that maybe I could do that. We could do that as guys. As a girl, you probably wouldn't.
No.
Girl teacher, you wouldn't be dealing with that. You're like, no, get out of here. You're. But that's a difference in gender and strength
drunk,
and all that.
He's unstable, and I don't want to deal with that. I'd rather call someone else to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's my duty as a teacher.
Whereas I'm looking to pick a fight because I like fights. I'm like a guy, so I'm like, come on. You're gonna take it. It's like have you seen Kindergarten Cop? He does that to one of the kids because he's the buff guy, right? So of course they need this moment where Arnold Schwarzenegger. He sees one of the kids bruise on the back of his neck, so he runs out all like Terminator style, and the guy turns around and he's like, "Hi, you must be the new teacher." He's like, poof, he like knocks him. He's like, "Don't ever hit them again." He's like, oh. He's like, "You bruise him, I bruise you." It's the kind of thing. It was really good. It's like, yeah, I punched the guy. Jerk. Did you have something to say, Ryan? Yeah. It might not be a good environment to have that reasoning, but I certainly sympathize with the idea. People will have different standards for the way in which they interact with their children, and I don't always get to decide how people raise their children at the same time. So that's a hard balance. Anyways, so I think that made it a little bit clearer towards the lying part of it, but life is messy, so that goes back to the practical, right? I might not have, what if I didn't have all those indicators? I maybe had a bruise, but not like necessarily he wasn't drunk. Maybe he was dressed nice. I was like, hi, how's it going? And it was all super nice about it. In that situation, I know that he's doing this, but he seems like he's a nice guy.
Those are the psychopaths.
Maybe, I know, but that's where the rules of your teaching or just your job kind of conflict. So I guess what I'm saying here is that theoretical ethics, you practice it within general frameworks, but then maybe the categories associated aren't actually as divisive as they are. Are you a consequentialist or are you a deontologist? It may not matter in the actual, rubber meets the road. Which, at this point, what I want to do is turn your attention to the argue it out or the charter plane. Which one?
Charter plane.
Charter plane. That's the easier one, right? Let's take 5. We're going to run out of time now because I'm blabbing too much. Take 5 minutes to look at the charter plane here real quick. Did you guys already choose the list here of people? Okay, so let me pull up that slide so we can see it. Charter plane, charter flight has crashed somewhere over whatever, don't care. You have all these things, nonsense, whatever. Some questions involved with the fact that you're only able to give people at insert intervals here. Who do you choose first? Were you able to make consensus, or are you able to make consensus between your lists? Who is the number one? Who is the person? Let's just start with that. Who is the person that you think is the most important to save, or who would you save first? Maybe not most important, but who would you save first?
Maria.
Okay, so you're Andres. Andres
my second.
Who do you save?
Maria.
Maria, who do you save?
Girl pregnant.
And I say Andres.
Where's your
There's two
Okay, so Cole.
Christian.
You have a top four? Who's the first? Who gets on that plane first?
Get it out.
Nicole?
Okay.
Maria? Okay, so
Maria.
you got Maria. All right.
But I mean, I have a top 4, and Andres is in it.
Okay, so we have a major division between Maria, Andres, and Cole. Nicole, sorry. I don't have the paper in front of me, unfortunately.
Here, just take my...
Yeah, I thought I had one. Thanks. So real quick, why would you choose? Let's start with you guys, Andres. Why would you choose Andres?
Andres, he can get more in life. He's a scientist. Other people like high school.
Okay, and so what would be the ethical reasoning behind that? What kind of ethical reasoning are you employing in this situation? So why are you saying that he is got more to offer society? What kind of ethical reasoning? That table, come on. This is a very basic one.
Subjective?
No, not subjective. Ethical reasoning.
Oh.
We've been talking about it all week. Subjective would be if you think that it's just your opinion that Andres is there and that you don't apply it to everyone. You're not saying it's really right. Consequentialist. Let's say it out loud.
Consequentialist.
Everyone can say that? Okay, just making sure. You want to be able to say it so you can spell it and use it and all that stuff. Consequentialist. Okay, so you're thinking it's the utility based on the fact that he's a scientist. Okay. All right, good. Anyone else do Andres? Okay, you guys did. Why?
So first we did it based on the severity of the wounds and
Okay.
in shock and just losing blood. So then based on the people that we would save first, we chose him because he was a scientist. So similar to their reasoning, that he would have more value to society once he was saved.
Okay, perfect. So you started with the severity of their wound. All right, so that's interesting. So is that itself a consequentialist? You're saying that the higher up you are, the worse your wound is, or more severe, like the more. Now, what ethical reasoning? It seems like a little bit of a blend between the two. Well, what is the ethical reasoning of saving someone who's got the worst wounds?
I think it would be consequential because you're saving the most lives if you take the most wounded out first.
Okay, so you're saying that you are actually going to save the most lives if you start with the people who can need the treatment the most. So ultimately, you're going to have a greater number of people. Now, does it have any qualifier about who might potentially be left behind at all? Or it says the helicopter can hold only 4 passengers at a time, so the estimated recovery will take 3 days. Unfortunately, temperatures plunged to 10 below at night, possibly impacting overall survival. What does that mean? There will be people who will die if they don't get on that plane in these circumstances. So it can kill people if they have to stay overnight. So just a heads up on that. So if you're checking out the most wounded, you're saying that you're still overarching There could be a deontological reasoning behind that too, to say that it's right. It's more right to save people who are in the worst circumstances. But I understand that you're talking about it. It's easy to be consequentialist, I think, over the fact. You're like, look, I'm trying to maximize. Yes, Kayla.
If you can push people who are most injured, then like, they could die overnight on the plane.
They could.
Since it's 3 days travel,
Yeah.
very possible. So
You could take people who are most healthy first,
Right.
and also fulfill the consequentialist environment, mitigate that intuition a little bit. They're the worst. They're the most painful, but they need to maybe. Sorry, guys. Strongest first. Yes. Yeah. You got Nicole. Now you're the only ones that did Nicole. Why is that? Oh, you did Nicole as well for the first one. Why?
Well, okay, so the first thing we saw is that she was a mother of two, so we kind of
Okay.
like realized instead of just one.
Oh, okay.
And it said she had bruised ribs. And
Bruised lips. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Your lips are so bruised.
a deep laceration on her back, so that
Okay.
sounds like I don't know if she'd be able to make it herself 3 days. So we need her to stay alive for her children.
Okay.
And like I don't know if she doesn't go now, I don't know if she'll be able to go later.
Right. Interesting. Okay, good. So there's that idea that she is actually 3 people, not just one. So again, a utilitarian or deontological? Probably you're saying that it's because she's 3, not because she's a mother. You're not saying all mothers go first. You're saying the fact that she is a mother means that she has 3 people, and then I'm going to affect their lives if she's not saved immediately. Oh, interesting. Okay, you guys.
Oh, I chose Maria.
Maria, now why?
She's pregnant.
Maria's pregnant, but she's a high school dropout, guys, and she's only 15. I mean, she can survive those.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the baby has to be put under because she is a high
maybe
school
someone
dropout.
dead. It wasn't that.
Calm yourself. Babies can survive things.
She just has she has a laceration just on her head, okay? So she can survive that. It's a cushy environment. It's like the egg drop that you guys do. Hey, have you guys ever thought of the egg drop as like a pregnancy thing? That engineering egg drop? No? Well, I know, but
No, but I chose her because the baby has a less chance of survival because it's only 3 months.
okay.
And then the baby's an innocent life, so why should the baby be held accountable for what his mother does? Just because your mother's a high school dropout doesn't mean that you don't decide, I'm going to be better than my parents.
I find that kind of interesting because there's that element of that idea that the utility of a Maria, because she is pregnant, is that she is actually 2 people, not 1. But 3 months pregnant, I mean, you're not really showing very much. There's a lot of things that I think would mitigate what we normally think. It's not like these 9 months. So those are interesting ideas. Also, it's interesting when you think about how if someone were to, if Maria were to be hurt or killed by somebody, that would actually be considered a double homicide and not just a single one. And yet Maria could potentially end her own pregnancy at 3 months. And no one would know because it's allowed. So I think those are interesting ethical points. Obviously, I'm getting to that abortion debate again. I don't want to get too much into it, but yeah.
I was gonna say, but her kid, she's a high school dropout, and she's pregnant at the age of 15.
You're saying that, okay, go ahead.
How can we say that, like, you're saying you're valuing the baby's life, but there's a good indicator that the baby's not going to turn out to be much more.
Okay, so standing back from the situation, you're like, Maria, I'm sorry, but you don't take a lot of, you've made a lot of bad choices in your life.
My dad dropped out of high school.
It's time for your separation.
My dad dropped
Let's go, guys. Like you actually have an extra space, but you like only take 3 people on purpose. You're like, sorry, Maria, this will teach you a lesson. Let's go.
My father dropped out in middle school
Oh, okay.
in
So
El
yeah.
Salvador, so he already doesn't know how to do any math above multiplication.
Oh, that's intense.
So I mean,
And you would save your dad.
just because a parent is not educated, does not have a certain level of education, doesn't mean that it limits the child.
Luis, would you like to respond? She said that just because you're not educated doesn't mean that you're not an important person in this situation.
she's a high school dropout, and that means that like she made the choice to drop out. Probably she's not, which means that she wasn't working hard enough. Now the thing is that the way things work today, because these high school dropouts are having babies at 15, they're outbreeding us.
Now hold on a second, because isn't that a little bit of a red herring? A little bit to say that that's certainly an argument that we discuss about outbreeding. I don't know if I'd use that term, but that there's a problem with teenage pregnancy that needs to be addressed. It is an environment such as a crisis like this the place to address it? To say, you know, was really like we need to decrease the teenage pregnancy population. Sorry, Maria. You know, like I don't know if that's the place to do it, but I certainly understand what you're saying, and you might save somebody else, but no one would ever know that you might be thinking, Maria, you made some bad choices. You know. Okay, let's. Is there any others? Is there a third one here, a fourth one? What'd you guys do?
I didn't know.
Am I the only one that chose Jose?
Mm-hmm. Tell us, Jose.
I chose Jose mostly because he's 10 years old. Like he's the youngest of the group, and he only speaks Spanish, and he's got a broken ankle. So if you think about how, okay, if you notice how not to sound like a terrible person, but if you notice how useful he is, he's actually not very at this point. So sending him off would actually help him more. And plus, you know, he's the youngest of the entire group, and he's going through shock. He's going to be traumatized for a long time. He's going to be in panic. So I mean, it's not going to be beneficial to the group if we have to, you know, try and calm him down. Especially when he can't even understand what we're saying to him. So the only person I can talk to him is going to be his dad.
So it might be just getting.
How do you know?
How do you know he can't speak English?
It says on the paper.
We forced it.
Like some of us speak Spanish, so it's like.
So it'd be okay.
For me, like Jose's not at the top of my list.
Really?
Just because like I can talk to him.
Kinsey.
Well, I think they will also, but it's kind of for different reasons. I didn't look at their age or their background at all whatsoever. I just did it based off of their injuries, because I mean, I don't care how old you are or what society has to say about you. Every life is valuable. Doesn't matter if you're a scientist or a homeless man. Either way, it's a person.
Okay.
So I just did it based on how many people I can.
So as a point of like as a consistent from a consistent ethical reasoning, you purposely did not look at those qualifiers on the person, because you weren't interested so much in their utility as much as this is the need they have, and it is right in and of itself. You're saying that the right action is to save the one who is the most in pain. So you try to develop that sort of thing. And you're not. Are you doing that because of the utility of saving the most lives, or is it because of just the idea of the least amongst them are the ones that are the most ready to die, are like the ones I have to do just in and of itself? Is it a utility thing? Like, are you trying to save the most lives in that situation?
Wait, what do you mean by the second?
Well, the second point is the deontological, where you're saying that it's actually the action of you saving the one who is the most hurt is the right action, whether or not you're going to save them or not.
It's both. I think
You think it's an arbitrary distinction?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
like, I believe in both. Like, of course, I want to save the most lives, but also it's morally right to, you know, save the person who's injured the most. I mean, it doesn't matter what their background.
Well, here's a good example. So you have 4 people come into the urgent care of a hospital, and you're a surgeon. You're a really good surgeon, and those 4 people are waiting in line. And at least 2 of the 4 will potentially die, and without really anyone knowing, except you would know if you were treating them. But now they're waiting in line, right? Because we got sort of lines in hospitals and not enough caretakers, right? And then there's 2 people who come in with like stab wounds and gunshots, and they're probably gang affiliated and all this kind of stuff. Now doctors have almost a deontological duty to save the person who's in the most trauma at the moment. But now these people have much less chances of living, but I'm going to spend the most time on these people because they're in the worst situation. And it could be that people are waiting in urgent care ready to die, and I could save more lives if I saved the people who were in less trauma. They just happen to have something that, if not treated soon, they have more time than someone with a wound. They, in fact, will die, and I will lose more people. So basically, I'm trying to set up the fact that saving these 2 lives, even though they're the worst, are actually going to cause a net loss in lives if I'm not treating the less healthy pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the question is it actually right to go to the most traumatic people or not? And I think I kind of colored it a little bit with the gang affiliation because that makes us feel like they're utility again, right? But a doctor, does he look at those things?
Yeah.
Does he look at, oh, that person's tattooed up, he's got needle wounds? He's not. Huh?
I don't like to think so.
Yeah, I don't like to think so either, and that's maybe something that they always have to consider. Like, did I really help that person if I know? You know what I mean? So that's an interesting thing, and interesting for like ER dramas and those kind. Was I thinking of his, his tattoo when I did that, or that I knew that he just robbed a bank? I let him die. I let him go. That whole like existential moment of Christ. Okay, that's a good point. So I want you to think about that too, because if you're getting rid of that, is it because of the act in and of itself or the utility of saving the most lives? Obviously, that might be arbitrary, but I think I at least refuted that a little bit. All right, so these are interesting points. Jose is a young kid, and he's the weakest amongst them, so maybe he is the best. Nicole seems to be at least 2 other people involved with her, so there's a utility to Nicole that the others don't have. It seems like then others, Andre is a scientist, so he's the most utility because he's the smartest or the most to give. Or maybe he's also in the most a good combination of the 2. And then we had who was the last one that you guys said? Maria. And Maria is young, and she needs help too because she's pregnant, so she's got a special case. The normal course of track would be like children first and women. That's like Titanic stuff, right? And then the men stay sort of nobly to die, no matter how useful they are. Because of that deontological component of it's right to save people who are the most vulnerable. Whether we agree with that or not, or our intuitions take over or not in those situations, it's certainly an interesting thing to investigate. Yes?
Also, the oldest was as well.
That's true, the oldest.
72 years old.
He chose the 72-year-old. Patrick's like, he's a geezer. Sorry, geezer. If we were in the wilderness here, you'd already be dead. Yeah.
But then that's just an assumption that like the men can last longer than the girls.
And sure, and when I said that, it was sort of the arcane, I was thinking that Titanic ethical reasoning. All the women and children go off on the boats to freeze.
That's the only type of sexism that actually works.
Damn it,
for us.
I can't get to the argue it out, so I never get there. So next week, what's going to happen is that we have this argue it out on violence and also on gene modification. So we got some things to talk about. Next week, let's just talk, okay? And then we'll start doing ethical reasoning. I'll go right into it with you guys. So be ready to talk about your particular real-life situations regarding violence, and then we'll switch gears and do the same thing with gene modification, what you think about modifying genes. I want you to start using the language of objective, subjective, your logic, informal logic, rhetoric, as well as our ethical ideas of consequential, deontological. That's what I'm looking for. I don't care about your opinion. I care about your reasoning. All right, guys, take care.